And welcome everybody to a new episode of the Wellbeing Leadership Podcast. Our mission is to impact millions of leaders through well-being leadership. And you, leader, do you think that change is important for achieving business results? For solving this question, we have here one of the most important world experts in leadership and change, Dr. Richard Boyatzis. So, Richard, thank you for being here. Dr. Richard is a distinguished professor at Case Western Reserve University. He has a PhD at Harvard. In more than 58 years of amazing research, he's on the top 2% scientists around the world. He wrote amazing bestsellers as Primal Leadership with Daniel Goleman and Annie McKee. Now he's going to launch his new book, The Science of Change. I'm really excited about that. I encourage all of you to buy this new book that is going to be for sure amazing. And 5 years ago, Richard wrote an endorsement for my first book. And now I am extremely happy that he's here with all of us to share of his knowledge. So Richard, thanks for being here. It's an honor for me, for us. You're here.
I enjoy every one of our conversations. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
So thank you very much. So our main audience are leaders. So you are researching a lot of years about change. Why change is important for leadership, or how the leaders can use the change for achieving these results?
Well, it starts with the observation that change is necessary for survival. I mean, from the cellular level all the way up to nations, if we don't keep adapting, we atrophy. And the challenge is that change is hard. So how do we know that? Well, there are all these expressions that we have in organizations, like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Or, why solve a problem that isn't there yet? So while change is necessary, it's hard. It involves the exercise of emotional self-control. And by the way, in change, I'm including learning and innovations. Those are changes. If you're trying to recover from a disease or from surgery, is at best anywhere in the world at 50%. And when it's really serious, my cardiothoracic surgeon students tell me that treatment adherence for coronary bypass surgery is less than 20%. So what's going on? Oh, and New Year's resolutions, or the American Psychological Association did a study several years ago asking everybody in the United States, of all the things you have thought during the past year that you wanted to improve on, how many did you succeed? And it's less than 20%. So, and whether it was becoming more sensitive or having a better work-life balance or losing weight or being fit. So, and in OD projects, organization development projects, we know from very careful research that was documented in Lyle Spencer's book a few years back, that 80% of the projects never reach any of the objectives cited. So what's going on? Well, the problem is, I think often what adds to the inhibition, the reluctance to explore innovation and change, are leaders' focus on financials and on trying to ensure producing an earnings per share or cash flow that fits investors' expectations or Wall Street analysts and such. Now, I am not against money. I mean, I built and ran two businesses. Honestly, I've enjoyed investing as a hobby and have done quite well with it. So I'm not anti-money. I understand how it's crucial. But when a person in a leadership position thinks that he or she or they are only focusing on return on investment to shareholders, they're being very narrow-minded, because shareholders only have money invested. Their employees have their lives and their families' lives invested. The communities that you work in have a lot more issues about the quality of life, and it goes on and on. So when you ask, what's the role of a leader? Well, the role of a leader is to, one, produce results that are needed within a particular time period, whether it's months, 3 months, a year, and to make sure that all 5 forms of capital at the disposal of the leader are stronger at the end than at the beginning. Because if it isn't, you're just spending the capital to get current performance, and you're not going to have many assets later. And that's where very often the preoccupation with any one of the forms of capital, financial being one of them, will result in a leader unintentionally creating restrictive, or what I would call restraining, forces. So we know that innovation, like output in any organization, is not distributed in a normal distribution. It's distributed in a power curve. 20%, less than 20%, often it's 10% of the people in an organization, of the leaders, are adding dramatic value. The rest aren't adding any value. You could take them out of their leadership or management jobs, and the organization would function more smoothly. We have data on that. So what is it about this extreme part of the power curve that's so different? Those are the people who embrace innovation as necessary, even though it's painful. And honestly, when you're trying to run an organization, it's annoying. I mean, if people keep changing things, it's hard to keep track. And, and Chester Barnard, the first major, I think the first, maybe second with Mary Parker before that, but theoretician about organizations in his classic book in 1938, talked about the fact that organizations exist to create predictable performance or results. And that means that they create inside of the organization a system based on assuring predictability, which requires conformity. So the whole idea of an organization is to restrict innovation, not to embrace it. Interesting question. Why, in many industries, when there has been a consolidation and you have these mega organizations, at some point it reaches a peak, and whether a regulator requires it or the market just rejects it, they blow apart. What happens is, at that moment, innovation is sparked everywhere, because to fill the gap, all these small organizations try to run in and do something different. So what I've been studying since the spring of 1967, when I left designing control systems for interplanetary vehicles, which was my first career, is what enables us to sustain desirable change. And actually doing the research studies to say, how does that happen for individuals, for pairs, for teams, families, organizations, communities, and countries? And that's what my book is integrating, is these 58 years of this research. But it's not just my research. I mean, I freaked out the editor at Oxford University Press on February 2nd, when I handed in the manuscript, because the references were 100 pages long. Now, as an author, you know what that means. It means there were almost 1,000 references. So I'm referencing a lot of people's work, of showing from the level of neural activation of networks in the brain and hormonal systems, all the way to country norms and country dynamics.
That's amazing. And yeah, I really encourage everybody to pre-order the book, if you're looking before
Bless you,
it's
Julio.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then to buy, we will share the link to buy and pre-order the book. And when you said about have this sustainable change, what piece of advices would you give leaders, when we think about the team members, to drive this change
Right,
inside
right.
the team?
So here's one of the things that in 1970, Dave Kolb and I published a study saying, if you set specific goals, you'll improve your change as an individual. Well, 30 years later, I was questioning whether or not that was true. And we started a series of neurological studies, neuroimaging studies. and hormonal studies to test that. And what we discovered is I was wrong. That in fact, specific goal setting closes the mind to new ideas and people. So what we are faced with is the fact that the knee-jerk reaction of leaders, well, let's get another metric on the dashboard, let's set another specific goal, in an attempt to motivate effort, does the opposite. It actually reduces motivation and effort. Because when you set a specific goal or focus on a specific problem, you activate a neural network in your brain called the task positive, which helps you get it done, but it narrows the vision. So in one study, they showed how you activate that and it narrows the vision, peripheral vision, from 180 degrees to 30. And when you narrow your vision, you're very focused. So again, it can help you get something done, but is it the right thing that you're getting done? And if you prematurely focus, you're missing all this other stuff. So we have litany of examples of, Blockbuster said, well, we're in the bricks and mortar business. People want to kind of browse a store. And Netflix says, no, we're in the accessing movies and TV shows to people via first DVDs and then streaming. Blockbuster's out of business. Netflix is huge. Amazon said the same thing around books. Borders is out of business. Amazon is one of the most wealthy companies in the world. Kodak, Eastman Kodak, owned the patents to digital photography in 1974, and yet by 1990, and I worked with the presidents of those divisions, but they were so focused on Fuji's brilliant 35 millimeter film that even by the 90s, they didn't pay attention to digital photography. So they got passed by Olympus, by Nikon, by Canon, and others. And they went bankrupt. They went out of business. So we see this time and time again, that narrowing of the focus will result at the organizational level in you missing what's going on with your competitors, missing changes in technologies, and missing even at other levels in your family. You're going to miss something that one of your children is feeling because you didn't notice it, or your partner. And when you're interacting with another person, you may be so busy wanting to influence them to do a certain thing that you want them to do, what we call coaching with compliance, that you miss the fact that that's not what they want to do, which means that they may or may not do it. So here's an issue. Leadership requires followers. It's a relationship. A person isn't a leader by being an individual. There's no such thing. If you're a leader, the only reason you exist is if you have followers. And just because people who report to you doesn't mean they're following you. They may be spitting in your coffee as they bring it to you. So the question ends up being, how do you build the relationships so that instead of being too narrow, people go in and out? And what we have found is that at the beginning and during the middle of a whole change or learning process, you want to focus on the vision, not the goals. You want to focus on the purpose, the meaning, the big picture, not the specific goals. Then late in the process, when you've exhausted all the possibilities, you've sorted out the actual problem from the symptoms, you've figured out what else might be going on, then you can set a specific goal. But most leaders in organizations today, because of this emphasis now on data analytics and artificial intelligence, it's making it worse. So what do we have? We have a motivation crisis. If 80%, according to Gallup, even on the poll that just came out, 80% of the people around the world that have full-time jobs aren't engaged in their work. So what do you think you're getting from these people whose bodies are showing up? You're not getting their creative thoughts. You're not getting their ways of serving their customers or their patients or their students better. So the challenge is, how do you invoke what I call the positive emotional attractor. How do you invoke a psychophysiological state that makes you open to new ideas and to consider the possibilities rather than focusing on the problems? And that's where the research is very clear. When you ask people about their hopes and dreams, so the guide question, I mean, for my 40, 50, and 60-year-old graduate students, even the ones that are surgeons, I get them to go out and talk to people to see if they can motivate them, inspire them to want to consider change. And the most important single question is, if your life were fantastic 10 to 15 years from now, what would it be like? So you don't want to forecast. You don't want to worry about feasibility. You literally want to break with reality and dream. And that's where inside your brain, you have this connection to a primal emotion called hope. And in that state, you do the most complex thinking. You're the most creative. You can handle multitasking. And it also helps because your immune system is functioning better. You're doing neurogenesis. So you're actually converting stem cells from your olfactory lobe and your upper hippocampus into new neurons. So all sorts of good things are happening when you're in this psychophysiological state. But the important issue is it's vision and the dream, the purpose. That's the big driver. So what can a leader do? Talk to people about the vision and the dream. Don't just tell them yours. Make sure you find out what theirs is. And then once you've got a consensus, remind people. I mean, I tell people that if you have a staff meeting or a project meeting once a week, make sure the first 5 to 10 minutes are discussing your purpose, not the goals, your purpose. You can do it by talking about values. You can do it by saying, why do we do this? And it's not to make money because that's the measure. It's not the purpose. Why are we doing this? You could do it by telling a story of a client, customer, or a patient who was helped. But the idea is every time you bring your people together, it doesn't take a lot of time, but you want to remind them of the purpose. That way, they're not focusing too narrowly at the beginning. Then, once you're open, you can go into the budget variances and all the financial discussions and all that, and people will approach it with more cognitive capability, more innovation. That's one primary finding that has been now shown at the neurological level and at the hormonal level and at the behavioral level. A second one is this issue of leadership relationships. Too many leaders think that what they're managing is the strategic plan, or they get browbeaten into thinking they're managing the budget, or that's what they spend their time on. You're not. You're managing or leading people who are 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 actually doing the work. I mean, many high-level leaders, there's 6 levels before you get to somebody who actually does the work. And if each one of those levels aren't really excited, what do you get by the time you get to the bottom of this? You get people acting like robots,
Yeah.
which is why artificial intelligence will be better. Because artificial intelligence still, although people say, oh, generative AI, it still is nowhere near the computing power of the human brain and the ingenuity of people. And what it requires is talking. So here's this simple human observation. If you really want to be a better leader, make sure you spend time talking with each other. And when you're talking, make sure you're listening.
Those are amazing practical advices, start
Right.
by sharing the vision,
Yep.
the frequency of the one-on-ones is very, very important. We have a lot of research about that, and also the quality of listening. And that what you said, it came to my mind that 12 years ago, I did your Coursera course, it's
Right.
more than 1.5 million,
Right.
people did that course in 215 countries. For me, it was very changed the way I thought. because I define my
Wow.
ideal self. And 12 years ago, now my ideal self is quite, I do what I love in the place I love. It was for me, it was very inspiring to do that. I remember the last time we talked, you told me maybe our conversation is going to help you for the next 10 years. And now in the leadership programs we are doing, we start the first workshop by defining the ideal self, because I said
Good.
that's the last time we talked. I said this is important, have this vision so clear. So you are, the creator of this concept. How do you think leaders can define better the ideal self, and how can help to share this vision, with the whole organization? How do you create
Well,
that that vision?
first, I think you asked this fundamental question. If things were absolutely perfect, ideal, 10 to 15 years from now, what would it be like? And you ask about life, because work is a subset of life. And if you don't have the life thing exciting, the work is going to be stressed. Second, you go out 10 to 15 years because you want to, like I said, break with reality. You want people to dream at this stage. Now, what are they dreaming about? Well, for some people, it's what's your purpose? And honest to God, it's never to make money. Even the lowest skilled person, a semi skilled worker on a production line, isn't working just to make money. They're working to make money so that their family can eat, or so that their
Mhm.
children can go to a better school, or so that they can live in a safer neighborhood. There's a reason for it, there's a purpose. And so, whether you're making shoes or you're running a very important advanced hospital, you ask the question, well, why are you doing these surgeries? Why are you treating these diseases? So that people live better lives. Or why are you selling shoes? It's not just to sell another 24,000 pairs of shoes. There's something about it that ends up, you want people to feel good about themselves. If you're selling shoes, you want people to feel as if they're safe and healthy in their ability to be mobile, assuming that they have mobility. So there are all sorts of issues that go to this deeper sense of purpose. Now, for some people, especially when you go to NGOs, it takes on the form of what's our calling, and you'll find people, not just people who are in pastoral or clerical roles, but others saying, well, what's our calling? So sometimes people might use the term mission rather than vision. As far as I'm concerned, I don't care which of those terms you use, vision, mission, purpose, meaning. We're talking about the big picture. And that's where the issue of dreaming becomes key. Now, not everybody can dream the same way. You and I are a part of a very special, maybe 400 million of us around the world, out of the almost 8 billion people now, have the ability to change the conditions of our lives and work. Most of the people alive today don't. They live in conditions of oppression or repression. And sometimes that's political. I remember talking to the CFO of one of the largest companies in Russia in 1992. I don't want to say the name of the company because that's not appropriate. And we were under the Coca-Cola Foundation. We had the financing to bring in groups of 30 top executives from Russian companies. After Glasnost and Perestroika in 1989, there were a lot of people running companies that say, what do we do now that we don't have the central government telling us what to do? Well, so we were we were funded to bring folks over in groups of 30 and to teach them about some of the latest thinking about management, and then go to organizations so they could see it in practice. So I introduced on one day of the workshop the issue of dreaming and vision. The next morning, I'm walking in the building, and this woman who was like I said, the CFO of one of the largest companies is walking in, and I said, "Oh, good morning," and I don't want to say her name, but how are you? She said, "Horrible." I said, "Really? What happened?" She said, "I couldn't sleep last night." I said, "Oh my God, why?" I'm thinking jet lag. She said, "No, it's what you talked about yesterday." I said, "Really?" So I said, "Okay, look, we don't have to go to class just yet." So we got a coffee and sat down in the lobby at a little table, and I said, "What happened?" She said, "Richard, I spent 39 years of my life in a system in which not only wasn't I allowed to dream, but if I did dream, not only might a colleague or a neighbor, but one of my family members might have turned me in, and next stop, I'm on the train to the gulag." She said, and all of a sudden, the world changes, and now I'm supposed to dream. I don't know how. And inside of me, it still feels like I'm risking being arrested. So people who live under conditions of oppression or have been traumatized, if you've been a victim of rape or assault, or God help you, kidnapping or murder, I mean, these are things that jar your mind, your heart for your life. If you're living in a hot zone where people are shooting at each other, and we know that that's not only in parts of the Ukraine or the Sudan or the Gaza Strip, it's also happening in many of the sections of the favelas outside of Rio or Sao Paulo or Curacao or New York or Chicago. So when people live in those conditions, they are constrained from dreaming. And when you encounter people and sometimes people come from middle class or wealthy backgrounds who have also been constrained from dreaming because they have a parent who's a perfectionist who beats them about not being perfect. Well, that leads to no innovation. Zero defects is no innovation. So there are many things that can contribute to this fear. When you encounter somebody that's in that state, the way you help them to dream is to introduce it in small doses. So if you ask the question that I said was the big picture, you're going to freak them out. So you start by saying either a playful way, suppose on Friday you won the lottery and you just won $80 million after tax. It's very important, after tax. How would your work or life change? Now, and the reason I say 80 million is if you invested that in a diversified portfolio in the stock market, certainly in the United States or in London or Switzerland, you're going to get a return of 5%. That means you're going to earn 4.5 million a year for the rest of your life. And that's assuming you don't want to dip into the capital. That's just the earnings. So when people say, well, I pay off my mortgage and I'd set aside money for my children's college funds, you do that in the first 2 months. What do you do in the third month? So, but that's the idea, is in a playful way, spark openness. The other thing I sometimes do is shift from the money aspect to, instead of invoking hope, I want to invoke care, love, compassion. And that's where I'll use the question, who's helped you become who you are in your life? Remembering some moments with them. What did they say or do? And when people recall these moments, when people have helped them, not influenced them, not role models, but we're using the word help because it invokes gratitude. What people do is they just feel this deep sense of love, being seen, being heard, being respected, being valued, being blessed. I mean, I've done this exercise in my speeches and lectures and webinars in all 7 continents, including Antarctica, and at least, I think, 65 countries. And people answer the same way. It's amazing how much it invokes a core passion. And so that's another way. Again, small dose. So the idea is if people are reluctant, now sometimes what you have to do is use other techniques. So there are other techniques that can get people there. If somebody does meditation or yoga or Tai Chi, that helps. Modest exercise, prayer to a loving God, not a vengeful God. That goes the other way. Well, we also know that having a pet like a dog, cat, or in some parts of the world, a horse or a monkey, but it's the stroking that actually invokes this physiological reaction. Helping others who are less fortunate, helping the elderly. I always tell my graduate students, helping your elderly professors will get you closer to heaven. Um, and now we know playing music, I don't mean like listening to music, I mean actually playing it or singing in a choir or dancing invokes this state. Uh, Walking in nature invokes the state. Laughing and being playful invokes the state.
So there are techniques that we know that you could do by yourself. And the more you practice, the better you're able to do it. And there are techniques you do with others. And those contribute to you being able to be into this open state. And as I said, Mandy Blake, a former doctoral student of mine who has a very successful practice in somatic awareness, she starts every one-on-one coaching session with some deep breathing exercises, which helps people reset. I mean, it literally is the antidote to stress. So there are a wide variety of things we can do that help bring people into this PEA, this positive emotional attractor state. And it's interesting, I'm talking about it with individuals, but in my book, I have this whole section looking at teams. So I look at music bands. Why is it that certain groups like Green Day or Gladys Knight and the Pips or the Osmonds or the Rolling Stones or the Grateful Dead exist year after year, decade after decade? Isn't it 60 years, the Rolling Stones? And yet you've got groups like the Spice Girls or Beatles or the Supremes or ABBA that don't even last 10 years. And when you look at that, when I look at the group like the Weihenmayer expedition, Allegra that climbed Everest and he was blind, versus the adventure consultants where individual leaders paid a lot of money and they argued to go up. And even though they were told to turn around by the fourth base camp, they continued going and 4 of them died and others lost noses and ears to frostbite, and only 3 made it to the summit. When you look at Alexander Klemchuk's deep caving, you know, he's set world records repeatedly on going the deepest caves in Azerbaijan, whereas Bill Stone's groups, looking at the Chev team in Oaxaca, Mexico, keep chasing after it but missing. The difference is these teams, whether they're music groups or adventure groups that work, have a bigger purpose. In the Allegra, it was to show the world that if you're labeled as having a physical disability, you don't. Because Eric Weihenmayer was blind and he made it to the summit. And they all, 19 of his party made it to the summit, and they all got home safely. About the music groups, U2 and each of the groups I mentioned that have lasted have a vision. U2, every time they have a world tour or an album, after the furor dies down, they go on retreat. And they come out of it with a different sense of, in their case, they go to spiritual aspects of it. They're Irish, so they go to part of their Catholicism. They go to folk music. But you see this practice of returning to the core purpose. And then you said, well, what happens to these other groups? Well, ABBA and the Spice Girls and the Supremes were all artificial groups. They didn't know each other. The producers advertised for people to form a band. And so as a result, they didn't have the same sense of purpose. And they didn't even like each other. ABBA, the disco music, ABBA was offered $1 billion several years ago to do a 1-year world tour, and they turned it down. $1 billion. They turned it down because they couldn't stand being on stage with each other. And a whole year of that seemed like living hell.
That's incredible.
When
For me,
you watch all of the material with the Beatles, I'm not talking about the quality music. I'm talking about sustainability. All of the Beatles talk about, by 1966, they were clear that they were exhausted from, and really the international stuff only started in 64. And 2 years later, they were exhausted and they wanted to spend time writing new music, recording new albums, and making movies. Well, they soon started, by the time 1968 came, they had very divergent interests in terms of what kind of music. George was going one way with Ravi Shankar and fusion. Paul wanted to go towards another way and even write a symphony. And John, of course, had dumped his first wife and married Yoko Ono. And they wanted to use music to do social activism. So by the last few years they were actually recording, they didn't spend a lot of time together. So you see that these teams, that Alexander Klimchuk has they're almost all are PhDs, scientists, and he encourages them all to do research and write, but they train constantly. Even when they don't have an expedition, they're training. And they're not just training around the technical issues, they're also training on terms of their communications and relationships. And if you've never studied deep caving, people go down a hole in the earth. And by the time they're down 100 yards, there's no light. It's total darkness. And Klimchuk set the world's record with 7,188 feet, over 2,000 meters. So they're spending most of the time in complete darkness. It's cold. It gets colder and colder. And it's wet because you're going in and out of lakes and streams and waterfalls. So at times you're swimming underwater, you're doing this and that. And the expeditions usually last 2 to 3 weeks, and you've got to carry everything you need for 2 to 3 weeks in the wet, dark, and cold on your back. And they try to save weight. They even take the cardboard center out of the toilet paper rolls to save weight. But they kept succeeding because they would spend all this time training as a team. Whereas Bill Stone, who's also a PhD and is credited with some of the most important inventions, the deep breather that allows them to go underwater and all that, he created. But his folks that are on his exploration teams often said, we don't go down as a team, we go down as a group of individuals. And they've had accidents, they even had one death and other kinds of things. So you keep finding this issue of shared vision, not from the top down, but really among everyone, top down, bottom up, whatever. It's crucial. Why are you doing it? And the quality of the relationships. I jumped to a classic in community change, the Chilean mine disaster in 2010. I don't know if you remember it, but 33 miners were trapped more than 2,000 feet below the surface for 69 days. They had enough air and food and water for a week or two. Right away, the company that was doing it had their chief engineer work with the Chilean Minister of Mines, and even the Chilean Navy got involved. And they immediately agreed upon a different set of, it was people from all these different organizations became the key leaders in the effort. The first thing they did was decided they would meet as a team, all of them working on any part of it, multiple times each day. And they would be transparent about what they were doing. So one of the first major things they did was identify that they had to start drilling 3 different rescue tunnels, which was crucial because the first 2 collapsed. The other thing they did right away was they sent out buses and planes to bring the families of those 33 miners into the place. They built a little village. They built housing for the families. They put fences around it to keep all the reporters away. And they had 2 briefings with the families every day. And it goes on and on. I mean, at one point, they got the miners out from this very narrow rescue with an escape pod that was designed by an engineer at NASA in the US. He read about the disaster. He thought their pod might be useful. So he got the authority to offer it. They offered it, and it was. That's how they all got out safe. And it was because they managed the community. It wasn't just the vision of getting the miners safely out, which was the shared vision, but it was shared and talked about constantly among all these different organizations and players. And they kept in dialogue all the time. So you keep finding this, whether at the team level or community level and at the organization level. Sorry, I'm rattling on, but it's a professorial disease.
Amazing, amazing examples. I think it's very, very useful, to know more about the purpose, the shared vision. And for me, it was very, the impact of the CFO of Russia that you say, like, almost 40 years doing one thing, probably successful for other people, like CEO, CFO of a company and all of that. And then she realized that maybe she didn't dreamt about the ideal self and what she really wanted. And this is something as well that it has some relations with well-being. Is something that we do here, like well-being leadership, like help leaders to increase
Right.
the well-being, of the team and the organization to get, better result at the end, but better people, happier people as well. So
Right.
what do you think about this concept of well-being leadership and how leaders can increase, the well-being of the
It's a
team
part,
members?
right. It is an immediate part of what I call the positive emotional attractor. So when people are in this state, they have a greater sense of well-being. They feel more motivated and engaged. They are more resilient. They're more empathic. They're less stressed, less anxious. I mean, we have published research studies showing that. So, yes, trying to emphasize the well-being, that's the approach to it that I was talking about when I said these various things you could do, like the yoga to meditation, prayer, helping people less fortunate. Those are all measures which promote well-being. Now, if you use well-being as the overarching category, it's the same as what I call the PEA, the positive emotional attractor state. But yes, I can even go so far as to say, because I've done this kind of research in a lot of different fields, in dentistry, in certain parts of the world, people know that you don't just have to visit a dentist, you have to, on a regular basis, visit a periodontist. Why? Because the most common source of inflammation in the human body is gum disease. And it's not extreme disease, it's minor. A little bit of redness, a little bit of puffiness. I mean, many people have it and don't even know they have it unless you go to a periodontist, because typical dentists may or may not notice it. If they're good, they notice it. But why is that important? Because as soon as you have a minor inflammation in your body, your immune system is compromised. And that puts your brain into this defensive mode. So even something as simple as a puffy gum can be a constant source in your body that reduces your ability to achieve a sense of well-being. And the holistic aspect of it. If you're having trouble at home with your partner or your children, when you come to work, it's not like you can leave it behind. If you think you can leave it behind, you're fooling yourself. I won't be harsh and say you're an idiot, but yeah, because that's not how the human body and mind functions. We're holistic. So what happens is you swallow it, but it's still in there churning up. So what happens is every time you try to do something with a smile or positive, it's requiring a lot more energy because you're fighting against this thing inside that just wants to scream or hit somebody. So yeah, I think your concept of well-being is a really sound one.
Cool. And you're an expert as well on emotional intelligence. You know how this concept, thinking about well-being and leadership, and then emotional
Well,
intelligence can be
right.
is so special concept for organizations mainly.
Right. Emotional intelligence is a very simple thing. It's how are you handling your emotions? Because our brains communicate with other brains of people around us in thousandths of a second, deeply unconscious. And it's not what we think we're showing, it's what we're really feeling inside. So if you just, had an argument with your partner and you go to work, it doesn't matter if you're smiling as you come in and say good morning, good morning. People are feeling uneasy as you walk by. They're picking up what's going on deep inside. So we know that happens. It's called emotional contagion. Because of that, it's very important that you be in touch with how you're feeling and what you do about it. And then the social intelligence part of emotional intelligence is how do you handle the emotions of others and build better relationships? Now, all of that isn't just something that you do inside, it's behavioral. And in fact, I've been doing these studies called competency studies. And the first one I did in 1970. My 1980 book was about this, linking it for leaders and managers in 12 large organizations, 6 in government agencies and 6 in private sector, in which we linked these behavior patterns that later we called emotional and social intelligence. At the time, we called them competencies, but linked it to actual performance. And it's very clear that these things predict a very, very powerful percentage of whether or not you're effective. And in later years, in the last 10 years, we've done these studies with engineers, not even managers, engineers. And I've had doctoral students working on it with teachers and physicians and nurses. So it's very clear that these abilities to manage emotions and the relationships with others is at the heart of effectiveness.
Great, that's awesome. It is so important. And when I remember, the last month I was in Nashville with Marshall Goldsmith, well, and I learned a lot about the importance of legacy. I think
Right.
your book is going to be, 58 years of research. It's a lot, a lot of your magic brain insight in one book. I would like you to ask about your book and your legacy. If you can explain about, what the legacy you want to
Well, I mean,
give.
another way to ask it is, what's my purpose? Well, if I was to pick one word, it's love. It's better relationships. Um, one part of my purpose is to make sure that I and my wife, we just celebrated our 47th anniversary, but we've actually known each other for 53, 54 years. One of my purposes is for she and I to have fun together and to be together and love each other and enjoy our time together. Which, I'm in a week and a half, I turned 78. She's in her 80s. We know we're not going to live forever. So probably these days we're even more focused on making sure that we're enjoying that. And of course, part of this relational thing is, with our dogs, now one dog, sadly, one passed on, our son, and friends. So that's one part of the purpose. Another part of the purpose is through my work as a scientist, as a researcher, and then as a teacher, trying to find out what helps people build better lives for themselves and their children, what helps our societies create a better, compassionate, inclusive social fabric. and not to let people fall prey to the manipulation. I mean, one of the lines I used in chapter 1 of my book is, are we on a cataclysmic path to oblivion? The doomsayers would tell us we are. And right now, every politician is shouting doom, not just in the United States because of our election coming up, but recently in the UK and Italy and India. They're all doing it. And in the process, the result that they want is to manipulate us. And this is all the parties. So one of the things that I hope for is to have people, because of the research and the practices, be less vulnerable to manipulation. So this book is written for researchers to stimulate more precise, refined, new avenues of research, but it's also written for professionals who want to, in their practices, be more research-based. I mean, I think that's the intellectual integrity of our work. I, as helpers, as teachers, as consultants, is to try to help people, but not with fads, with things that are actually we've tested to see is it true or not. And that's a part of it. But why? Again, it's so that we have better lives, so that people can love each other and have fun together and do things that we never thought before were possible, so that children grow up excited with their curiosity and the possibilities. Those are the things that I'm trying to contribute to. And I think I have been all my life. I mean, I remember my mother when I was really little, like 6 or 7. One time she was we had 1-bedroom apartment in part of Queens. And when my sister was born, when I was 3, I got moved to sleep on the couch in the hall, and my sister got the bed in my parents' bedroom. But so there are times my mother was at this one time in the bedroom doing some kind of cleaning or sorting out. And she all of a sudden comes out, and I'm at the kitchen table, and I found a screwdriver, and I was taking apart the toaster. I'd unplugged it, fortunately, but I was taking apart the toaster. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I want to figure out how it works. I don't understand how it works." And I've had this history of, as she pointed out to me, of taking things apart. I don't always put them back together again, right? But so personally, it's the driving curiosity. But when you say curiosity for what? It's to build better lives. That's a key part of the purpose.
Well, that's amazing. So thank you for that. I think I can feel the love even in our conversations. How you how you bring all these positive things to me, and for sure for the people is
And by
watching
the way, if
us.
anybody listening to your podcast is on the Nobel Prize nominating committee, read my book, think about
For sure, I will the number first supporter on that.
it.
for for sure. And your work is amazing, and it has changed a lot. The way of a lot of people see the importance of leadership and change. So we are finishing our podcast. I could talk with you hours and hours. You know that. I would love you give us your last message. Mainly for leaders. Of what the message would you like to give us to finish this episode.
Our relationships are the agar agar in the petri dish of life. When our relationships are built on us being in sync or in tune with each other, when we share a dream, share a vision, share a faith, when we care for each other, when we are energized by each other, magic happens. And that's amazing, because when people do that and they give rise to it with this positive angle of the vision and compassion, people come together and do things that otherwise we'd think were impossible. That's my hope, that people do more of that.
That's very special. I think, yeah, for me, the word of this podcast is magical. I one day I on my ideal self was to have this conversation. Maybe not because maybe it was too much, and now it's like a dream. So I wish everybody can dream more to be a better leader, a better person, and a better human being as you are. So thank you, Richard. Uh,
Thank you,
I
Julian.
wish you all the best. Thank
Right.
you.
Bye-bye.